Youko, awesome. This is great. We don't get to speak to people like you most often because you're very specialist in what you do. And you're not, do you consider yourself an investor by any means?
No, I don't.
Okay, but you deal with a lot of investors. You deal with a lot of developers.
My clients are buying right within the current zoning, and then they run into a complicated one and they need some support. And we have some that, they've been doing it for a while, but they want to go to the next level. And that's a lot of our client base is people that are sort of looking to go from the as of right, looking to really leverage what can be done through a planning process to increase the development potential of a property. And that's what a lot of our clients do. It results in creation of more housing, more units, but it also has financial benefits to a lot of our clients. And then, of course, we work for developers of all makes: ground-oriented subdivision developers, high-rise developers, rural estate developers, kind of people working in all those areas of home creation.
So you know what's happening in Kingston.
I'm involved with a lot of the planning side of things, for sure. I have that benefit, Renee, that I'm involved. So, maybe just a little bit about myself.
Yes.
So I'm a planner, an associate. I'm a registered professional planner with Fotenn Planning and Design. I've been with Fotenn for over 8 years now, working in Kingston. Before that, I worked for about a year in the GTA, working in a lot of subdivision development, but a little bit of infrastructure work as well. And then at Fotenn, I've worked on a lot of work in Kingston, a little bit of work outside of Kingston. Our office spans the region from Brighton out to Cornwall, and then up to Highway 7 and north of that. So we have a fairly large region. We have a lot of planners in the office that work sort of all over the place. The bulk of my work is in Kingston and in the immediately abutting municipalities like Loyalist Township, maybe out to Napanee a little bit in Prince Edward County, but mostly Kingston.
And you spoke at the Kingston Investment Club, and I'm really grateful for that because what we're seeing a lot of changes momently right now, where this is vastly going to change how the Kingston landscape looks like in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of major changes happening, and they're happening at different scale. So one of the hats that I wear is that I chair the Land Development Committee for the Kingston Home Builders Association, and there's a lot of interest there for a lot of those macro scale changes. The city of Kingston has a urban settlement area boundary. It's a mandated boundary that's been in place since, I think, 2005. At the provincial level, the province required municipalities to implement these. It may have even predated that. And what that means is that the city isn't allowed to extend municipal services outside of the boundary, which forces intensification in a very meaningful and positive way. However, what happens is growth. Growth happens, and eventually, at some point in time, we outgrow our boundary, and we need to expand that and bring more developable land into the picture. And the city of Kingston hasn't changed its boundary in over a decade, and our current official plan dates back to 2010. And the plans before that go back a bit of a ways, but there hasn't been a change to the boundary since a meaningful change to the boundary since then. And now we're looking at making that happen. The city is bringing land out. Yes, the city is bringing lands outside of the boundary into the boundary, and they know they need the lands. They've done some population projections, and they know that we're going to have over 220,000 people by 2051. That's what the projections are telling us. That's a lot of growth in a fairly short amount of time. And in order to facilitate that, we need to grow the boundary, and we need to intensify inside the boundary, and we basically need every residential unit that can be built.
So how does that work? Does the city ask the province to go, listen, my boundaries are a bit larger now, or they got to buy land, or?
Yeah, no, they don't. The city doesn't have to buy land, but there is a mandated process. Every official plan has to be reviewed on a cycle. The province requires that when you create a new official plan, you review that new plan within 10 years, and then every 5 years after that. So the city of Kingston is initiating its 5-year review of the official plan right now. And it is, as part of that process, up until a couple of weeks, well, I think it's still a requirement. The province requires a municipal comprehensive review if you're going to be expanding the boundary. And what that means is that you have to look at all of the different land uses and land needs within your municipality. What's your population? And then what's your population going to be? Where are they going to live? Where are they going to work? What are their other needs going to be? How are they going to, support themselves through commercial uses, amenities, and all that stuff. So it's a very comprehensive set of studies that a municipality has to do. It takes time, it costs a lot of money, and that's why it only has to get done every 5 years. So the city of Kingston is working on those studies right now. They've had the population studies, they've gone to council, that was endorsed. That's how we know we have this sort of population target. And right now what they're working on is a land needs assessment on the residential side. They're looking at a commercial land inventory and strategy and an employment land strategy and inventory. And all of those studies together are going to give the planning department an opportunity to review our needs and come up with an approach in changing our land uses within the city, as well as our policy framework in the official plan, to help facilitate that. And what the city of Kingston is doing for the first time as well, which is again a very positive change, is that the infrastructure and transportation master planning exercises are happening not quite at the same time, but they're happening sort of in lockstep. The transportation master plan, which is in this case is going to be an integrated mobility plan, looking at vehicular traffic and active transportation, walking, biking, all that stuff.
That's extensive planning. That's detailed. I love it.
It's very detailed, Renee. And so that transportation plan is going to happen sort of a few months behind the official plan, but really taking the information from the official plan and that update process, and it's going to feed into the transportation plan. And the two are they're going to speak to each other, but they're going to do it in a very meaningful and active way. And then at the same time, Utilities Kingston is going to be moving ahead with their infrastructure, what water and wastewater master planning, so that the infrastructure that we need to support the growth that we know we need is also going to be planned in concert with that. So we're in a very interesting time at a macro scale in Kingston, where this growth is going to happen. We know that we're going to need at least 340 hectares of residential land outside of the boundary, and that's a lot of land.
And that's basically the east end and the west end of it. I mean, clearly they're not going south or north. They're expanding on the east end and side of things.
Fundamentally, that's what we expect. The 401 has been a natural barrier and a sort of a more than natural barrier for a long time. There aren't really any stub services. So the opportunity to extend to the north is really not there in a cost-effective way. But there's opportunities to the east and to the west. And that's where the land is available. Frankly, there is land there. And that's where it makes sense to grow. And that's likely where we're going to grow. That's where we certainly expect to grow and where we expect to see growth directed through the official plan update.
What other big changes that are happening that are they're going to be deciding in the next couple months or so by the end of the year or midway?
So the official plan update is a longer term process. You're absolutely right. That's going to take us into 2026 before those policies are really adopted by council. And once they're adopted by council, they still have to go to the province, and the province has to approve them because it is a substantial change. So the expansion of the boundary is going to take some time to happen. In the more immediate time frame, and we're talking very immediate here, the city is looking at making sort of a sweeping set of housekeeping amendments to the official plan, to the zoning bylaw. Again, looking to support and facilitate intensification through the tools that are available to the city. So that's the official plan, which is sort of our overarching guiding document. When we have to do a zoning amendment or minor variance, any kind of planning approval, we have to look to see the official plan. What does it say we can do? What does it want us to do here? And then the zoning bylaw tells us what we can and cannot do. So the city's changing those two documents and looking to facilitate development, both at a large scale. They're implementing this framework for express transit areas. If you're developing on an express transit, or if you own land on an express transit area, or on an express transit route, I should say, they're looking to simplify the process of developing at a larger scale. That's generally
so we're talking Princess Street, Bath Road, maybe
you got it. Princess Street,
Portsmouth, Sir John A.
Yep, Sir John A. Gardner's Road. You've got Montreal, Division Street. So you've got all these sort of arterial corridors where they're directing and looking to facilitate and support intensification, really streamlining that process for applicants. And in some areas, that's only going up to 4 stories or 6 stories. In some cases, it's going up to 10, 12 or taller. So that's like at the large scale. We've got some policies that are supportive there. There's also making some changes on the zoning side to make development of larger buildings easier, improving our mechanical, sort of our rooftop projections and things like that, reducing some of our parking requirements, which is sort of an ongoing thing that the city of Kingston is always refining that exercise of trying to, what's our need and what do we want? What do we want to see as a community? And when it comes to vehicular traffic and vehicle dependence, and there's very much, the planning department has really taken the bull by the horns on that and pushing and facilitating reductions in parking, minimum parking requirements.
We did a minor variance. We did a minor variance last year, and we had to throwing a bike shed, and it seems as if they're all throwing bike sheds everywhere.
And that's bike sheds is a great one because, you know, at the large scale, they're making all these improvements. And then at the small scale, at the scale of, you know, the single attached house that you want to convert to 2 units, 3 units, the province made some big steps in that they forced everyone to go to 3 units wherever a single semi or townhouse is permitted use in an urban boundary. So that was a big change that the province made. The city of Kingston has a restriction of 8 bedrooms per unit or per lot. That is a barrier in many ways. And there's parking requirements. They've tried to make those a little bit lighter than the province did, and they were successful. But we have these bike parking requirements. We have walkway provisions. So provisions really aimed at facilitating the functional needs. The city doesn't want to allow development and then have people build houses that no one can access and that aren't functional and livable. So the zoning is trying to create a framework to support that. And what's happening is that they're getting feedback. They're seeing this is what we're rolling out these changes, and then we're getting feedback from the community. This isn't working. This is too restrictive. Let's change this. They're getting a lot of variance applications for this type of thing. So they take all that information.
Examples of that, because that's interesting.
Yeah, so like conversions of existing garages. So if you have an existing garage that doesn't comply with your yard setback, you can't put a secondary unit in there right now. The zoning doesn't allow it. The building department has been a little bit more flexible, but the zoning doesn't allow it. So what they're proposing to do is to change that. Let's allow those conversions of ground floors that are of garages that are detached so that we can create more units. Walkways can be really challenging. You have to have them separately delineated from your driveway.
Is it 1.2 meters or 1.1 now? They're tightening.
That's it. It's 1.2 meters right now, and it has to be separately delineated. And they're changing that to say, well, you can go down to 1.1 and you can actually have it overlap on part of your driveway as long as you have it drawn differently. You can have it pinched to 0.8 meters. So they're providing a little bit more flexibility around that. They're providing more flexibility around bike parking, reducing the requirement for you to show the dimensions and meet the dimensions. Provide a shed, make sure that it's big enough, but you don't have to, you know, have it as precisely shown on a plan necessarily. It's sort of taken for granted that if you provide a shed here, it'll be big enough that people will be able to fit their bikes in it. We're seeing a very, I think, positive proposal from city staff to increase the number of units from 3 to 4, and to increase the number of bedrooms from 8 to 12.
Yeah.
That's a huge positive in terms of the housing.
So it seems as if the whole underlying theme is more accommodation, more units out there. Now, I'd like to just throw into this the idea that the city was accepted. They received, or they will be receiving in a span of 3 years, $27.5 million.
Sure.
My question is that contingent on the number of units that they'll be creating every year?
Yes, it is. So
it is.
The Housing Accelerator Fund, which is the federal program that provided that money, the structure of that fund is that it's based on the commitments that a municipality makes. So the city of Kingston put in a bid and sort of made a commitment to making all these changes, and they asked for money. They were eligible for a certain amount, and they got less than half of that, which is unfortunate. They
wanted 65 million, but they only got 27. All right.
Yeah, they didn't get as much as they wanted, but they still got, that's 27 million is a lot more money than I have in my bank account. So it's very meaningful, but they still have to hold up their end of the bargain. There was a municipality recently, and I can't remember which one it is, but I just learned about this last week. They had their funding pulled because they did not implement the changes that they were asked for. So the feds said, we're not going to give you that money, and we want you to pay us back for the amount that you spent.
Okay, so these changes, and I think the big one is, as you mentioned, is the 8 to 12 units, going from 8 bedrooms per lot going to 12, and that's the big one that's going to be. The council doesn't seem to be enjoying about this. There's pushing people back on this one. They don't want this one. Everything else they seem to want, but that one.
Well, the 4-unit thing is a source of a great controversy right now. It's been proposed by staff. It's going to planning committee on Thursday night this week. That's June 20th, with a recommendation for approval from staff. The planning committee has to vote. And then once planning committee makes its vote, whether they recommend they follow the staff recommendation or not, it then has to go to council, and council has to make a decision. And that'll be, I think, July 9th. So we've got a couple of weeks now, but what we're starting to see some of that correspondence come out. Maybe there's concerns around the 4 units and 12 bedroom has been a source of concern for months now. It's been an area where there's some concern, but I think there's a little bit more concern around the overall changes that are being proposed. There's other there's other changes that are being recommended by staff that'll shift the way that we do and evaluate residential density in the city in a very positive way, really focusing on built form rather than some abstract numbers that really don't have any meaning on an individual property basis. They're really neighborhood scale metrics like units per net hectare. Applying that type of figure on an individual property, you might have a single detached house on a small lot that has a higher density than a 150 unit apartment building on a big lot. And that doesn't really make any sense. That really isn't the way that planning should work. Units per net hectare is really a neighborhood scale metric that should be applied to understand on a large scale how many people and what's our density. So the city's official plan has used that metric for a long time, and staff are proposing to change it and really look at low rise, mid rise, and high rise in terms of our density framework. And I think that's a huge positive, but it is of course very threatening and very different than the way things have been done. And I think there's going to be some pushback from
so what does that look like on a scale for people living in the community? Does that mean that people are going to be buying houses and tearing them down and building like high rises or mid-size? Is that what you envision?
Not on an individual property basis, but we've seen, for example, some of the upzoning that's been done in the past decade around Williamsville and most recently in the Central Kingston Growth Strategy, Johnson Street, Brock Street, where the zoning encourages lot consolidation in order to facilitate larger creation.
There's one going on right now on Aberdeen.
You got it. Aberdeen at Johnson
They just tore down 3 buildings. They've been there for years. I mean, some of them, it was just a shack. The other one was a very nice house, but old. What's up with that?
So that's an example. I don't know how many units have been knocked down, but it's a couple of units in a house sort of in that range. But they're building 45 units. They're building a new 45 unit building, 6 stories. So we're talking a meaningful and substantial change in density, an increase in density in an area where we need that, right?
Yes, definitely. Trip on the university for sure.
What we're seeing is, the city is trying to facilitate that type of very positive development. It's on an arterial road. It's in a very walkable area. This is the type of thing where we want to see intensification happen. That type of guidance in the official plan isn't going to change. We're not seeing a carte blanche. Anyone can just build anything anywhere. We still have that same framework where if you want to do medium density, you can do it in these, or mid-rise, you can do it in these types of situations. If you want to do it in high-rise, you got to do it in these situations. So we're still seeing that type of direction that's coming down in the policy framework so that, development happens generally where we want it to happen in a way that's going to be positive from a community side of things. But I think as a society, as a community, we have to recognize that single-family zoning and single-family housing is a barrier to intensification and to the housing situation, the housing challenges that we have.
Is it an archaic system overall?
I wouldn't say it's archaic, Renee, but I think that it's maybe it's had its heyday, and there's areas where there's certainly demand. There's a lot of demand for single-family housing, and that demand is not going to change. We're all sort of raised at a young age that the dream of being a Canadian is very much like the American dream in the sense that we want to have our single-family house, our yard, in our garden, and that's the dream. There was a recent survey that Terrion did, and 67% of home buyers, their first choice would have been a single detached house. 67% of home buyers did not buy single detached houses because we can't afford it. And the economy is just not there. So people need to live wherever they can afford and where their affordability meets their other sort of needs and their other wants and their other employment, lifestyle changes, all that stuff. So there's, I think, a responsibility to provide as much option and as much opportunity and selection out there in a meaningful way. And that's what the city is sort of moving in that direction. Let's try and facilitate this. But that's very, very threatening. And in a community like this, the areas near Queens, where there's been a lot of change, it's completely understandable. Residents might have been there for 30 years, and then, over the course of a season, 2-3 properties on their street sell, and all of a sudden they've got 40 students partying and they've got it's change, and it's threatening. And it's a totally understandable situation. But I think we can make that happen in as positive a way as we can. Instead of knocking down a house and putting an 8-bedroom unit, we can provide a framework that allows 3 3-bedroom units or 3 4-bedroom units. And those units are a little bit more neighborhood friendly. And that's the kind of thing that we want to see happen, is that sort of creation of more smaller units that we being, I think, the city, but also many in the development communities, is to create housing units that are manageable, and don't result in major disruptions to a neighborhood.
Let me ask you.
Neighbors.
So you work with a lot of investors, developers, great big entrepreneurs, so small size to big size. Where do you see the opportunities? What are the big players doing that people are following suit this year and next year?
Interesting question. There are opportunities at every level, and we see that in the market, right? We see investors and contractors and builders that are very successful just building as of right, which means they comply with their zoning. So they buy a property, it permits 3 units and 8 bedrooms. There's only, say, a bungalow there with 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. They knock it down, they build a triplex, and that's successful. We see a lot of that. So there's opportunities there. There's a lot of large properties. Yep.
As a realtor, we see a lot of people just looking for land, looking for not necessarily land, but like a single family dwelling with a large backyard or something.
Yep.
Which is a great opportunity nowadays, thanks to Bill 23 and moving forward. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me, is that's where a lot of the opportunity is. The zoning allows a lot of that to happen. I think there's opportunities there, and there's no question about it. There's also opportunities in taking a large property and maybe severing it into 2, and then developing one lot with a 3-unit building, and then taking the existing lot and upgrading what's there to a 3-unit or 4-unit if that zoning goes through. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. And then we see other opportunities like the lot consolidation scenario. If you're in the right location, sometimes it makes sense. The land economics often don't in reality. And that's one of the barriers that we have here, is that it doesn't make sense to buy 3 properties along Johnson Street and develop them as a multi-unit building a lot of the time. Sometimes it does. But it has to be a unique situation. In this case, in the case of the project we're looking at, the properties are oriented and of a size that it made sense. And it worked out perfectly for our client. They still were not able to do it. That was our client. They're not able to do that as of right. They had to get some minor variances to do it, because even with 3 properties, didn't quite meet the minimum thresholds in the zoning that were intended. But at the end of the day, it achieved what the zoning was wanting to do. And it will achieve that once it's
How long did it take? The moment it started the discussion and then the minor variance, we're talking easily a year process?
I would say it was, I'd have to go back and look at my notes to be precise. It generally takes time to get to an application. So, a property is acquired, the owner will maybe come up with a concept plan. We'll go for a confidential pre-application with City of Kingston staff. We'll get some feedback. We'll get a list of supporting studies that have to be done.
I'm assuming that he was owner of one building and then bought the other 2 or something like that.
Well, that I can't say.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. I have no idea, but I'm just imagining that it was something of the sort where they saw an opportunity and 45 units in that one spot. That sounds amazing, because I think the student rents, I think they go between $1,200 per room or $1,100 per room to potentially $1,500 per room.
And I think I don't know the numbers. That's not really where I live.
Yeah.
Going from however many bedrooms were there to 45 units with more than that bedrooms. I think it was 68 bedrooms or in the 60s, if I remember correctly, but I might be mistaken offhand. You're talking a very meaningful change and the meaningful creation of new housing. And that's fundamentally what this is
needed, definitely needed for sure.
And obviously there's an economic side of it. No one is going to build houses just for the sake of it, just for the fun of it. It's an investment opportunity. It's an opportunity for property owners, but it is an opportunity for people to live as well. And I think we can't lose sight of that. At the end of the day, this is I think a business that we're all in. It's all in different ways, but we're all in the same business ultimately of helping people live somewhere and getting that to happen. In the process.
Well, that's interesting. It's a balance between investors and homeowners in a way. Is that how you see it?
I don't necessarily see it as a balance, because I think at the end of the day, everyone has the same objective. As a landlord, you want to provide housing that you will have stable tenancy.
Yep.
And you'll have people that they're going to stay there, and you're going to make your life as easy as possible. And they want a place where they can live and you're not going to make their life difficult. And I think generally speaking, there's an intersect there where at the end of the day, we all should and do, I think, want to create housing that people want to live in.
You say create housing, and it's interesting because we're talking about an area where it's clearly close to Queen's University. It's clearly going to be for Queen's students. It seemed as if, and I'm in favor of this because once again, we're helping clients buy property close to the university or college because that's what works at the moment. Does anybody currently build units besides new homes for non-students in Kingston?
Absolutely. A lot of the development is not geared towards students. And even the student geared development is off. What our clients sometimes find is that they might build a building, a multi-unit building, and target it for students. But because of the housing shortage that we fundamentally have in the city, our vacancy rate is still, once again, I think it's one of the lowest in the province, if not the lowest.
Hovers around 1%, perhaps.
And it has for so long, you know, and we're still in that range. I think we're at 1.2 at the last stats came out. And then we were, which if I remember correctly, was reported at the time as the lowest in the province. There's a deficit of housing supply. So what our clients are seeing, they might be building a building and targeting it for students, and they're seeing young professionals move in and people who just need a place to live, new immigrants, people who just literally of all backgrounds and demographics are coming here because they need a place to live. And
compared to Toronto, it's much more affordable.
It's much more affordable. And the factors that make a place appealing to a student will often make it appeal to someone else, right? The Queens in Kingston is situated so close to the downtown that if you're close to Queens, you're close to the downtown. Maybe there's a couple of blocks immediately around Queens where that's your primary orientation, but Queens is also a major employer. And there's a ton of people that work at Queens that need to live near Queens and would rather live near Queens. And they end up living in a lot of these buildings too. So there's that factor, but then anywhere else in the city, you've got, a lot of people that want to age in place. And that is very much reliant on accessible building and the building code and apartment buildings.
So I like your perspective on Kingston because few people speak to this level of depth on way it's building and all that. How do you see it moving forward in the next 10 years? And are you liking the way it's kind of moving? Or would you go this? They could be more lenient on this. I would believe in that. What's your opinion on these things?
I think that we're moving in the right direction, frankly, with a lot of the proposed changes. I think development and the creation of new housing is something that's going to happen. And directing it is really the objective of an official plan. Is where do we want to see it?
Like directing it in a fashion that's favorable for house growth?
Well, let me frame that as like from a planning perspective. You don't want to be building where you don't have servicing capacity. You don't want to build multi-unit buildings where you don't have the sanitary capacity or this water capacity for it. So you want to have the infrastructure there. You want to have the transportation network to support that. You want to have the proximity to employment, to amenity, to conveniences. So developing and sort of encouraging development to occur in walkable areas or on major streets, those are sort of fundamental characteristics that we see, and we're seeing that really, I think, reflected in the official plan proposed changes that we're seeing. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more support for the creation of mixed neighborhoods with maybe some commercial uses, maybe mixed densities in neighborhoods. We see, again and again that one of the biggest challenges that we have in single family only neighborhoods is that the density isn't there at a population scale to support things like transit or to support commercial uses. So commercial uses end up being at the periphery or you have to get in your car and drive. They're a kilometer or two away.
Yeah. And I imagine you're talking about stuff like that was built in the 60s, 70s, like Strathcona Park, Calvin Park.
A lot of that stuff.
Park. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's very much something that we needed to have, and we still need to have that type of housing. But what we're seeing is instead of just developing, one type of housing everywhere, we're seeing an integration of let's build that type of housing. Absolutely. But let's also have nodes of density so that where you have that type of housing, you can also have a little bit more conveniences and a little bit of opportunities for employment and so on. So
are they implementing this now? And like what neighborhood? The newer places? Like
that's a good, It's a really interesting question. We're seeing it now. And I think an example of that I'm involved with is West Village. So right behind the RioCan Center, that community was developed at a much higher density than is
yeah,
typical.
yeah. The French school is being there. They've got, it's very interesting because they've got the big high rise in the middle, like kind of on the side of it. And you got some single family dwellings and you got the school in the middle.
Yeah, there's a long-term care home there, 192 beds. You've got townhouses, single attached dwellings. We're proposing a new housing form there, back-to-back townhouses, just right now in another phase. But you're looking at that's a fairly complete type of community. And that's what we're going to see. At least that's what we expect to see.
A wide range of use there.
All right.
Are there going to be stores as well? Well,
yeah,
I guess next door.
There are next door for sure, but there is a commercial block as part of that on Taylor Kidd. And we're involved with working with the applicant and it was our client to try and reduce the overall size of that commercial block to create more housing, but also to maintain a functional and viable commercial block that'll still serve the needs of the community. So very much a complete community. That's what we should expect to see when the city expands the boundaries, is in those new areas, in those areas of growth, we're going to see more of that. And we're going to see policy changes, I think, that'll facilitate the gradual intensification and sort of evolution in existing communities that'll support that type of development over time. It's not going to happen overnight, especially in established areas. It's going to take time, but you're going to see that evolution over time. We've seen it in Williamsville, for example, over the past decade.
Yes, that was beautiful. I mean, it was just, it was vacant land for many years. In fact, I was living in Williamsville at the time when they're talking about it. And it actually morphed into exactly what they're talking about, just big high rises and then commercial buildings at the bottom.
And we're seeing that. We're seeing that have, I think, a lot of success, and it's completely transformed that stretch of road. And it's what we're seeing, what we're starting to see now is the planning department has learned a lot from Williamsville. It's been an incredible learning experience for planning, engineering, and transportation. And they've tried different things, and they're applying what they're learning both to reiterations and sort of changes that they're making in those areas, but also they want to apply that elsewhere, like Central Kingston. And we're going to see that in the new growth areas. We're seeing that in some of these amendments that they're talking about doing and proposing to do, which is that they're learning from how they've done things in the past and the feedback that they're getting from developers that are successful.
Are they mimicking other cities or other communities that they're seeing going, I like what they're seeing, what they're doing in, I don't know, Barcelona, places maybe a bit more extreme, but I mean, you've seen many, as an urban planner, you've seen a lot of different types of settings and communities. What's your ideal setting or ideal community that you would, if you could, just move there and live there because of the setting it had, the mixed use of everywhere, parks and bicycles? Or
I'm going to give you the cheesy answer because I live in Kingston and I'm happy here. So I'm in the community that I want to live in, Renee, and I'm very happy. I live in the East End and I love it. I can walk to the grocery store and I can walk on nature trails. I've got everything I need right there. So I'm quite happy.
Good.
But
I'm happy as well in Kingston. I live downtown. It's a beautiful place. Downtown is the place to live. It's amazing.
We've got a great thing going in the city, and we don't want to lose that. This is a question that comes up often, and we see it discussed in public forums a lot, which is, this is how they're doing it in Europe. This is how they're doing it in Barcelona. We see examples of Amsterdam and cycling, and we see a lot of that stuff. And really, those are great examples for us to sort of aspire to. But in planning, so much of what we do is context specific. It really does matter where you are. And that applies in all scales. Europe, the population density broadly on a regional scale is something that we have nothing like that in Ontario.
No, plus the weather as well.
The weather's different as well.
Biking in January, February. It's just like few people would do it.
There's people that do it, and I pass them in my car, but there's definitely a different volume in January than there is in June, for sure. But you've also we don't have 2,000 years of population growth at a particular scale, and our land ownership is very different. It's, it comes from obviously the colonial sort of history that we have and the legacy of that and the land grants and so on. We also have the additional influence of America and their sort of ideologies and their attitudes around land ownership. And that's really affected us in Canada. We can't take a city block downtown, knock down the whole block and put a 6-story development like you would see in Barcelona. We just can't do that in a meaningful way. Maybe if a
So are there other cities within Ontario or the United States, North America, that we're emulating or copying or getting ideas from, or
we are doing that. We do
Okay.
look at, and I say we, this is really the planning department that does a lot of this. They will look at other examples a little bit worldwide, to a certain degree, but really recognizing that that's more of an aspirational sort of example than a functional one. But they'll look at examples across Ontario and across the region, maybe in the US a little bit, and say, okay, well, this is what other people are doing. There are things that you could do in certain places, like you cross the river and you go into New York. There's things that you can do that we can't do. Our policies just don't allow it. It's just not something that is permitted, or we have massive restrictions that make it fundamentally unachievable. So our approach to that is different. Our approach to urban boundaries, for example, is fairly unique in North America, in Ontario. So we have these restrictions that don't exist in a lot of other places. But what we'll do is we'll look at, the planning department will look at other cities in the GTA and Ottawa and say, okay, this is what they're doing. This is what's working. This is what's not. They'll talk to their colleagues in other municipalities. And we saw that happen through the new zoning bylaw. When that new zoning bylaw was brought into effect, there was a lot of collaboration at the staff level with other municipalities to see what's being done elsewhere. And one of those transformative elements was the parking approach in Kingston. There was this sort of an example, this exercise in sort of looking at all the parking studies that have been done in Kingston on development applications over the last 20 years, and examples from other municipalities, and sort of looking for the best practices out of that, and then taking the best practices and trying to go a little bit above and going a little bit further. And we've seen that in our standards. We're the only municipality that I'm aware of, although I'm sure there's others, certainly in the region, we don't have a minimum parking requirement for commercial uses. It really comes down to, through development, you have to sort of demonstrate that your need is there. But what that takes is that you look at the traditional zoning bylaw, many of which date from the 50s and 60s and 70s, and that sort of era, and the parking standards in those zoning bylaws are massive. Even in Kingston, as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, if you wanted to do a mixed-use development, you were often fighting to reduce your parking because the requirements are too high. And now we're the other way, where we're often looking to provide a little bit more parking.
I was told that the building at King and Queen, the Homestead building that they're building, I'm told there's like 300 parking spots. It's going to be a 23-story building, and there's there's I don't know. Someone told me 300 parking spots within that building. Like, there's 4 stories going down.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with the full details of that one, Renee, but my understanding on that file is that there is a fairly high parking ratio, but I believe some of that might have been for the public. I might be mistaken.
Oh, really?
But there's the needs at the residential level are very different. So the city went very far in terms of the commercial. They've reduced the parking needs for residential. And like I said, what we're often seeing is our clients are saying, look, it's all well and good, but our current infrastructure framework isn't quite there to support the parking ratios that you're forcing us to do. So we're in this bit of a chicken and egg situation where I think the transportation network has to get improved to fully facilitate the parking standards that we currently have in place, because they're already pretty low in a lot of areas of the city, and it's difficult to provide more. So
how did this building? I mean, I live right by it. They got 23 stories. That's amazing. Like, it's every other building around, it's like 9 or 10 stories. This one, it's 23. Like, how does that happen?
That happens with a massive effort. So we were not involved in that particular file, but the Homestead worked with IBI Group, which is now Arcadis, as their planners, and they fought for that for years. So they had they ultimately they have approval for a 23-story there, and then kitty corner to that on Queen Street, they have the 19-story approval, right? So that went to, it may have been the local appeal tribunal at the time. It may have been the AOB. That was ultimately appealed, and there's a legal challenge, and then they went back to the tribunal. That took a long time. That took years to get that approval in place. And with projects of that nature that take so long, by the time they're getting built, in that case especially, there's been so many changes that the parking standards that they have now, they might have had to fight even harder for back then, or sorry, they might not have had to fight for them as much then as they would now. And so they've got the approvals, they're getting built, but now what we're seeing is a lot of a push to try and reduce parking to the extent feasible. And that's an area where there's a lot of, it's an evolving area, because we're always trying to understand what the needs are for parking. And in some areas of the city, it makes sense to drop those numbers. In some areas of the city, it's difficult to, and it's difficult now. But I mentioned earlier on that integrated mobility plan. There's some very forward-thinking ideas coming out of the transportation group of the city around how to improve transit and how to make transit more effective in Kingston, and facilitate development in transit areas. And what we're going to see, I think, through that exercise over the next couple of years is a fairly transformative approach. The implementation of it, I'm very excited to see, because I just don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, July 9th is when it goes to council, and it's going to be decided. A lot of things will be decided.
So there's a lot of some meaningful changes, Renee, that are going to be impactful to, I think, a lot of the investment community. That 4-unit, 12-bedroom thing is so it's going to planning committee this Thursday night.
Okay.
If there's any members that are, anyone who's listening to this, or members of your network that are keen on actually developing, as of right, 4 units with 12 bedrooms, this planning committee is hearing a lot of opposition. They're hearing a lot of comments against it. So if there's members that are interested in support in doing that, I think every letter, every email, every call to a local councillor or to the planning committee matters. So if there's members that are interested in favor of doing that, let make your voice heard, because most of what the planning committee hears is no, we don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want that. So the more people that they hear saying, come on, this is impactful, I'm actually going to use this, and I'm going to build housing for people.
So this is at City Hall.
It'll be at City Hall on Thursday evening is the planning committee meeting. There's a couple of other files going that night, but there's going to be a recommendation made around these housekeeping and administrative amendments. And then that'll go to council on July 9th for an actual decision.
This is amazing.
We hope.
Yeah. This is really good stuff. This is really good stuff. Very exciting stuff. This is amazing. Thanks for taking the time, Youko, on doing this, because I think few people know such detail on what's happening in Kingston. So I appreciate your time and effort and speaking about this. So and I hope we speak again, because I find this stuff fascinating. I don't know about you, I find it very fascinating.
I do too. Well, I love talking about it, Renee. And if there's any specific topics in the future that you're interested in and that your listeners are interested in, and other members of your network that pertain to development planning and anything like that, I'm very happy to talk about those subjects with yourself and sort of. Let's
speak again. Let's speak again. Basically, come September or so, once things get settled, then we'll speak again. I think that'll be great. Thank you again. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.